Camp Scott, a well-known institution in Oklahoma, welcomes dozens of Girl Scouts every summer from across the state for 2 weeks of holidays in the heart of nature. But in June 1977, a terrible tragedy shatters the camp's peaceful routine when three young girls are found brutally murdered in their tent. A massive manhunt is then launched across Oklahoma to find the killer, who seems to be taking great pleasure in taunting the investigation. What the police don't yet know is that one killer might be hiding another. The Girl Scouts are a deeply rooted part of American identity. Founded in 1912, the movement quickly attracted thousands of young people. Halfway between adventurer and soldier, a Girl Scout is trained to deal with the challenges of the wild, which includes the vast variety of American wildlife and plant life. Beyond learning to light a fire, pitch a tent, collect water, build a shelter, and climb a tree, Girl Scouts are also taught basic first aid, how to survive in storms or avalanches, and are expected to give back to their local communities. Badges are awarded as rewards, along with bronze, silver, and gold trophies, earned during events known as jamborees, or through door-to-door cookie sales. Each Girl Scout troop wears its own uniform, one for outdoor activities and another reserved for official ceremonies and award presentations. Oklahoma, too, has caught the scouting fever. It's actually here that one of the most famous camps was founded, Camp Scott, established in 1928. Since its creation, the camp has been reserved exclusively for girls. It's a particularly large campsite, spread over several acres of dense forest, just a few miles from Mayes County. It is divided into 10 units, each of which can accommodate up to 8 tents, set on wooden platforms for extra comfort, housing 3 to 4 Girl Scouts each. Each unit carries a symbolic Native American name, as is common in these kinds of outdoor activities in the U.S. In peak season, when the camp is full, there can be up to 350 campers. Added to this are the counselors, commonly called leaders in scouting terms, as well as the medical staff, postal team, and kitchen crew. The leaders don't sleep in the tents with the girls but stay in a separate lodge. Thanks to its excellent reputation, Camp Scott is a favorite among parents looking for an affordable vacation that combines fun with useful life skills for their daughters. The large number of campers and the camp's reputation for safety despite its remote location convinced most parents to sign up their daughters without much hesitation. On June 12, 1977, preparations were in full swing at the camp for the opening of the summer season. That day, over 100 girls were expected to arrive and begin their 2-week adventure in nature, where they would learn new things in fun and engaging ways. The departure for camp was treated like a big event, both by the parents and their daughters. Buses ran back and forth all morning, shuttling the girls from the meeting point to Camp Scott. On board one of the buses, the mood was set by a young troop leader wearing an olive green uniform and a matching beret with a red feather sticking out of it. Standing next to the driver, she cheerfully spoke into her microphone to address the passengers. "Have any of you ever worn a uniform before?" Several high-pitched voices replied in unison. "I have," shouted a little girl with big glasses sitting in the very back. "Oh, really? And when was that?" "Last summer. I went last summer." "Oh, wow, well done. And what's your name, young lady?" "Michelle Goose, ma'am." Michelle Heather Goose was 9 years old. This was her second time at Camp Scott. She had enjoyed it so much the previous year that she begged her parents to let her go back. Michelle was described as an energetic and athletic girl, despite her serious demeanor and oversized glasses. Sitting in the second row, Denise Milner, age 10, rolled her eyes in annoyance. She couldn't stand girls like Michelle, who always tried to grab the spotlight and impress the adults. Unlike Michelle, Denise didn't want to come to camp at all. She wasn't a fan of group activities. It had been her mother's idea, who hoped it would help her daughter become more independent. Denise was a studious child and usually top of her class. She had a younger sister named Cassie. She came from an African-American family, and her parents were divorced. Her mother always made sure she received a good education and lacked for nothing. Right beside them sat a mischievous-looking little blonde girl with pigtails. She seemed just as cheerful as Michelle, even though she was clearly the youngest of the group. Her name was Lori Farmer, and she was 8 years old. The three girls didn't know each other yet, and for two of them, it was their very first experience in the tight-knit world of scouting. As the bus pulled into camp, two rows of girls in uniform were already waiting to greet the newcomers. They made up the welcoming committee. Three troop leaders, Dee, Susan, and Carla, were also on hand to guide the girls, explain the daily schedule, and go over the rules of the camp. Each camper received a copy of the activity list, and several squeals of excitement erupted at the mention of canoeing. Denise, Lori, and Michelle were assigned to Kiowa Camp, tent number 8, Unit 11. Shouldering their heavy backpacks and trying their best to stand tall, they followed their troop leader into the forest. It turns out that Unit 11 is the most geographically isolated part of the camp, located behind all the others, right on the edge of the forest. But more than that, tent number 8, where Lori, Michelle, and Denise are set to spend the next 2 weeks together, is also the farthest tent from the rest of the camp. It sits 190 meters away from the tent used by the troop leader and is partially hidden behind the showers. After helping the girls settle in and unroll their sleeping bags, the troop leader informs them that a fourth camper, Glenda, will likely be joining them later that afternoon. The rest of the day is filled with orientation activities for the new arrivals. They're expected to memorize the paths throughout the camp and learn what not to do. No smoking, no alcohol, no loud noises at night, no arguing. They're also told they'll be allowed to wear their official uniforms starting the next morning. Michelle, Lori, and Denise spend the whole afternoon waiting for Glenda, but she never shows up. She ends up being delayed, and around 7 p.m., a violent thunderstorm hits the camp, making it impossible for her to move in with them. She had to be quickly assigned to another tent for the night. Despite the thunder rumbling outside, the mood in the dining area set up under a large open tent is cheerful and carefree. The girls have dinner together, chatting and laughing. One of the counselors, holding a guitar, begins to play the famous spiritual song, Kumbaya, My Lord, which has since become something of an anthem for the Girl Scouts. After the meal, the campers hurry back to their tents to take shelter from the rain. The first day at camp ends a little earlier than expected, and many are disappointed they can't stay up longer. It's summer, and night hasn't quite fallen yet. To pass the time, the girls write letters to their parents. Under the light of a lantern hanging from the tent frame, Michelle, Denise, and Lori, who have already become fast friends in the way only children can lean over their notebooks. Michelle, a left-hander, writes to her favorite aunt, "Dear Aunt Karen, how are you? I'm fine. I'm at a scout camp for 2 weeks. We can't leave our tent because there's a thunderstorm outside. My friends are Denise Milner and Lori Farmer, and we're in the last tent of the unit. Love, Michelle." Meanwhile, Lori writes in her small, neat handwriting, "Dear Mom and Dad and Joe and Chad and Kathy, we're getting ready for bed. It's 7:40 p.m. and I couldn't wait to write to you. We're at the start of a storm and we're all writing letters because there's nothing else to do. I met two friends, Michelle and Denise, and I'm sharing a tent with them. It started raining after dinner and we're sleeping on little cots. Love, Lori." She does add later, however, that she's excited about taking part in the upcoming camp activities. Denise's letter, on the other hand, is much less optimistic. Unlike her two tent mates, she's already made up her mind about the next 14 days in the forest. This is how she expresses it to her mother. "Dear Mom, I don't like camp. It's scary, and it's been raining since the first day. I made two new friends, Lori and Michelle. They're in the tent with me. Glenda was supposed to join us tonight, but she couldn't because of the storm. Mom, I don't want to stay here for 2 weeks. I want to go home and be with you and Cassie." The girls fold their letters, slip them into envelopes, stick little stickers on them, and place them on a small table to be mailed the next morning. After that, they apply mosquito repellent gel, change into their pajamas, and slide into their sleeping bags. Outside, it's hot and humid. Rain crackles against the leaves, and the air is thick with the scent of damp earth. It's the very first night they're spending away from home and their parents, a real challenge for such young girls. Still, they know they're safe. Carla, the unit leader, is just nearby in case anything happens. But at their age, the idea of real danger is unknown. The only things that scare them are witches and ogres from fairy tales. Nevertheless, they leave their lantern on, hanging from the tent wall. Total darkness is actually discouraged in this kind of setting. Night wears on, and the rain keeps falling in waves. On the other side of the camp, where the older girls are housed, no one is sleeping yet. They have other concerns, other things to talk about. In hushed voices, they chat about parties, boys, and upcoming outings. Meanwhile, the counselor in charge of Unit 3 returns from the showers. Wearing a raincoat, she tries to avoid stepping in the muddy puddles that splash up against her yellow rubber boots. "No way am I walking around here in dress shoes, those would be ruined," she thinks. On the path, she suddenly hears muffled sounds, whimpers coming from the woods. In the forest, silence makes even the smallest noise startling. Concerned, she immediately points her flashlight toward the trees, but sees nothing suspicious. She figures it's probably just one of the girls who went out to collect some wood. The raincoat-wearing counselor shrugs nonchalantly and continues toward her tent. Around 1:30 a.m. at the far end of the camp, Carla Wilhite tries to focus on the book she's holding. Like all the tents in the camp, hers isn't completely waterproof, and droplets of water are starting to seep in from outside, annoying enough to keep her from sleeping. One of the golden rules of any proper scout camp: forget about comfort. You have to survive like a cave dweller, even if you were in the suburbs barely 2 days ago. During the school year, Carla, 18, is a student at the University of Tulsa. That summer, she landed a job as a camp counselor at Camp Scott after only 2 months of training. Unit 11, where Lori, Michelle, and Denise are staying, was assigned to her. She actually finds them quite brave for making it through this first night alone in the middle of nature, with only the barest comfort. Let's hope none of them show up in the middle of the night crying. During her training, she was taught to be extremely patient, but also to balance that with a strong dose of authority and just as much compassion. A fine equation, easier said than done, she thinks. Despite the certificate she received at the end of the program, Carla knows it'll take years before she becomes one of those truly charismatic leaders, someone the girls love and look up to. But what's that noise? No way! They're still whispering. The girls finally settle down. As she makes her second trip back to her tent, Carla Wilhite suddenly hears a strange noise hard to describe, but reminiscent of a frog being strangled. Just like the Unit 3 counselor earlier in the night, she points her flashlight into the trees, scanning the woods. She sees nothing suspicious. Slowly, the camp drifts back into silence. In the tents, most of the girls have long since fallen asleep. But the peace won't last long. It's just past 1 a.m. when the thunderstorm finally begins to let up. However, the strange noises continue throughout the night, more precisely until 4 a.m., and are heard by many of the girls, unable to identify what they might be Was it a fox, a wild boar, or even a wolf? Each one curls up deeper into her sleeping bag, straining to hear through the darkness. At 2 a.m., one of the girls in tent number 7 is awakened by a light, followed by the sound of footsteps. She also clearly hears heavy, labored breathing. Half an hour later, some scouts notice a figure with a flashlight standing near their tent, even lifting the plastic flap that serves as a window. The person stands there motionless for a few seconds, then walks away. Terrified, none of the girls think to raise the alarm. But it is at 3 a.m. that the most disturbing event of the entire night takes place. A 9-year-old girl is jolted awake by a scream coming from the far end of the camp. A second scream follows a few minutes later. The girl falls back asleep without trying to find out more. After all, how could she? At 9 years old, you don't really know how to react when something goes wrong. One thing is certain: the storm, along with all the coming and going, ruined this first night. But that was nothing compared to the mysterious sounds that many of the girls reported hearing at various hours. The camp wakes up groggily the next morning, June 13th, 1977. Carla Wilhite is the first to rise. She slept poorly and has a pounding headache. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone else is still asleep, she heads to the showers in peace and plans to grab a bottle of paracetamol from the infirmary. She leaves her tent with her toiletries and towel, walking the path that leads to the camp's shared facilities, where the communal showers and bathrooms are located. She has no idea what awaits her at the end of that path. She first spots a shape she initially thinks is a rolled-up sleeping bag with 2 large backpacks on top. She thinks she recognizes it. Curious, she quickens her pace, heart pounding. Who would leave their things right in the middle of the path? As she gets closer, she finally understands what it is. Inside the sleeping bag lies the body of a little girl, already in a state of rigor mortis. Denise Milner. Carla stifles a scream. The girl's neck is slashed, and there are signs of strangulation. Who could have done this? Carla looks frantically around, panic rising at the thought that the killer might still be nearby, watching. She quickly realizes she is in danger, that the entire camp is in danger, and that at this very moment, a dangerous individual is lurking in the area, possibly ready to strike again. Leaving the body where it is, Carla rushes to wake up 2 other counselors, Dee and Susan. The 3 of them run to tent number 8 to see what's going on. The tent is completely covered in blood. The 3 young women hesitate to take a step inside, too afraid of what they might find. They go to get backup. They alert someone named Richard, the camp security officer, who is immediately sent to tent number 8. Inside, 2 more bodies are discovered: Michelle Hughes, lying on the ground, and Lori Farmer, wrapped in her sleeping bag like Denise. All 3 had been brutalized, their bodies slashed with a knife, strangled, and sexually assaulted. "We need to call the police immediately." While Dee and Susan begin gathering the scouts in their unit, Carla rushes to the first aid post to raise the alarm. "Emergency assembly now!" she shouts into the loudspeaker. Rescue services are notified immediately. Police, informed of the triple murder, arrive within minutes to oversee the evacuation of the entire camp, a delicate operation requiring a great deal of composure. Officers are deployed all around. They must act with authority because, between the girls who need to be stopped from heading to the bathrooms and those who are still asleep and need to be roused quickly to leave their tents, there's a lot to handle. The key was to distract the girls and prevent them from seeing the bodies of the 3 little girls, hidden in black bags and hastily carried away on stretchers, headed for the hospital for autopsy. Witnessing such a scene could have sparked widespread panic and made the situation completely unmanageable. The camp staff carefully managed this delicate rescue operation, keeping their composure despite the obvious pallor and fear etched on the faces of Carla, Dee, and Susan, who kept repeating, "No, everything's fine." At the switchboard, the operator calmly reassured parents with the same neutral message. "There has been an accident at the camp. All the girls will be returning home in an hour. Don't worry, we have the situation under control." The parents had no idea what had really happened at the camp and wouldn't find out until much later through the media. It took the police a full 4 hours to evacuate the entire camp and send the girls home by bus without providing any real explanation to the families. The counselors and troop leaders were the last to leave. An immediate order was given to close the camp to all visitors. Now fully secured, the investigation could finally begin. In tent number 8, where the bodies of Lori and Michelle had been found, investigators noticed that the ground was completely soaked with blood the killer had tried to hide or at least wipe away, though not very successfully. A significant amount of physical evidence had been left behind: a roll of black duct tape, a red flashlight, and lengths of cord. Police quickly understood that the murderer had acted swiftly and without much attention to detail. On one of the blankets, they found a strand of dark hair, along with two distinct shoe prints, one from a boot and the other from a sneaker. This immediately raised suspicions that there may have been two killers, or at the very least, an accomplice. Fingerprints were also discovered throughout the tent and on the bodies, though these would mysteriously vanish from the autopsy report later on. Those same prints were found on the cords used to tie up the girls and on the flashlight, which was stained with blood on the lens. With such solid evidence, the police were confident the perpetrators would be identified within a matter of days. The following day, canine tracking units were brought to the scene. They proved extremely helpful. By the end of the day, the dogs had located what was believed to be the murder weapon, a crowbar, also bearing fingerprints. 2 days after the triple murder at Camp Scott, the press began reporting on the footprint evidence. A striking error, considering the investigation was still in its early stages, and such information was meant to remain confidential. It was becoming clear that the investigation had been botched from the start, rushed, in the hopes of gaining time. Sadly, more irregularities would soon come to light. The very next day, the sheriff of Tulsa committed a serious blunder by making a public statement that would later be disproven. He claimed that none of the 3 girls had been sexually assaulted and that these allegations had been fabricated by the forensic examiners. How he came to that conclusion remains unknown. It is believed he may have wanted to protect the parents' emotions or downplay the horror to maintain calm in the community. But by then, the case had already ignited public outrage throughout Oklahoma. Many citizens identified with the parents and sympathized deeply with their grief. The young, innocent faces of the 3 victims were plastered across newspapers and aired constantly on TV news, fueling widespread anger toward the still unknown killers, whom many now hoped would be swiftly executed in the electric chair. Amid this intense emotional turmoil, the investigation pushed forward, despite glaring miscommunication between the police and the medical examiners, who were now engaged in a bitter standoff following the sheriff's reckless statement. It would take about 10 days for the authorities to identify a first suspect. He was a 33-year-old Native American man named Gene Leroy Hart. Police discovered that he had been on the run for 4 years after escaping from the Oklahoma State Reformatory, where he had been serving a sentence. Gene Hart had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for the kidnapping and rape of 2 pregnant women. His file described him as a potentially dangerous individual, armed and a sexual predator. On June 22, 1977, more than 2 weeks after the triple murder, new evidence was discovered in a cave about 5 kilometers from Camp Scott. Inside were 3 photographs showing 3 women, accompanied by a chilling note dated June 17th. The killer was here. Bye-bye, idiots. The cave also contained a pair of sunglasses previously stolen from one of the camp counselors, a roll of duct tape, and a flashlight battery identical to the one found near the tent on the first day of the investigation. A link was quickly established between the items found in the cave and the main suspect, Gene Hart, particularly for geographical reasons. The cave was located just a few meters from his childhood home. It was plausible that he had taken refuge there during his time on the run. Further damning evidence came from analysis of the 3 photographs, which revealed an undeniable fact. All 3 had been developed in the photo lab of the Oklahoma State Reformatory, where Gene Hart had been imprisoned 4 years earlier. To make matters worse, eyewitnesses claimed to have seen someone lurking near the camp 2 days after the murders, a man who, by their accounts, bore a strong resemblance to Gene Hart. That was all it took to spark a full-blown manhunt on June 24, 1977, mobilizing 200 police officers and 400 volunteers. But once again, things did not go as planned. The situation was quickly derailed by the presence of curious onlookers and amateur searchers who joined the hunt, causing confusion among the ranks of volunteers. Despite police warnings, many arrived heavily armed with rifles slung over their shoulders. Some showed up drunk, others were caught with cannabis in their possession. Chaos spread, and a wave of arrests followed, costing the police precious time. Realizing they could not handle the situation alone, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, stepped in to help oversee the search. The 40 federal agents who took over made some shocking discoveries of their own. According to their findings, Gene Hart had been on the campgrounds 2 or 3 weeks before the girls' arrival. This theory was supported by a troop leader's disturbing confession to the FBI. She recounted that 2 months earlier, in April, she had attended a training session at the camp that was scheduled to last a week, but was abruptly cut short for an undisclosed reason. One evening, upon returning to her cabin, she found that someone had broken in during her absence. The intruder had ransacked her personal belongings, urinated on one of her underwear garments, and stolen a box of donuts. But the most disturbing discovery was a grease-stained note he had left behind. "We have a mission to kill 3 little girls in campsite number 1. Frightened, she raised the alarm. Around the cabin, a security guard found a crude effigy hanging from a tree branch, a macabre display meant to terrify. Because of this, many counselors ended their training early. Some even chose to leave that very night, fearing the creepy intruder might return. Nonetheless, the camp administrators went ahead with the summer session and welcomed the young campers, brushing off the disturbing message as a sick joke meant to scare people, nothing more. The FBI immediately linked this earlier event to the tragedy that would unfold later. Clearly, the killer had to be the same person who wrote the note. It was no joke. Federal investigators were now convinced they were dealing with one of those pathological criminals who communicate through written messages, enjoying the act of leaving taunting clues at each scene, like a twisted treasure hunt meant to mislead investigators and fuel his ego. Then on June 29, 1977, another unsettling incident took place at Camp Scott. The security guard on duty that night heard a noise coming from the woods. He grabbed his rifle and went out to investigate, but found nothing. Upon returning, he noticed a package left on the steps of the camp director's house. It was a backpack, and inside were wet shoes and socks belonging to Denise Milner. Despite all of this, authorities still couldn't say with absolute certainty that Gene Hart was the killer. However, a $5,000 reward was offered for any information on his whereabouts. Then came April 6, 1978. Acting on a tip from a game warden, 8 officers from the Oklahoma Police Force conducted a raid on the home of a Cherokee medicine man, located about 70 kilometers from Camp Scott. It turned out this house had served as Jean Leroy Hart's hideout since the beginning of his flight from justice. A member of the Cherokee Nation himself, Hart had benefited from the protection of his community, who firmly believed in his innocence and had gone to great lengths to help him evade capture. When the officers arrived, Hart offered no resistance. He did not argue or protest, he simply let them handcuff him without a word. A tall, well-built man with straight black hair, thick glasses, and a muscular frame, he fit the profile that had been circulating. The 8 officers literally cheered as they captured him. They took turns posing with him, both individually and as a group, as if displaying a hunting trophy they had just brought down. This arrest, and especially the way it was photographed and celebrated, would later draw widespread criticism. Throughout the impromptu photo session, Gene Hart stood silently, wearing a tank top and blue shorts, his head bowed, hands cuffed behind his back. The press wasted no time splashing the photos across front pages. Everywhere the headlines declared, "Oklahoma's brave police have finally captured the monstrous killer of the little Girl Scouts at Camp Scott." For the families, this meant the end of a 10-month nightmare. 10 months of silence, sleepless nights, and lingering questions that, even now, might remain unanswered for years, if not forever. And yet the Milner, Farmer, and Gus families all refused to face the accused in court. They chose not to attend the trial. The trial of Gene Leroy Hart began in March 1979. The media frenzy following his arrest had turned the trial into something far greater than a criminal case. It became a symbolic trial of the entire state of Oklahoma versus Gene Hart, the bloodthirsty maniac, the savage beast who had preyed on innocent little girls. The public wanted justice, and for them, that meant punishment swift and severe. In the defendant's box, Hart remained as stoic as he had been during his arrest, avoiding cameras, barely reacting, slowly nodding with a distant look in his eyes. The courtroom, packed with reporters and onlookers, expected a clear-cut verdict. After all, wasn't it obvious? They couldn't have been more wrong. During the trial, Hart's defense attorney, Garvin Isaacs, began to dismantle the prosecution's case with precision and determination. According to Isaacs, the police had arrested the wrong man, and they had done so hastily not in the pursuit of truth, but to close the case quickly, bask in public praise, and save face. He pointed to the infamous trophy photo session as the ultimate sign of bias, unprofessionalism, and arrogance. At the close of his defense, Isaacs turned to the jury. With a deep, theatrical voice, he declared, "As we speak, the true murderer is still out there, free. You are about to send an innocent man to prison for a crime he did not commit." And he had a point. In their tunnel vision to bring Hart to justice, the police had completely ignored another highly dangerous suspect, a man named William Stevens, a serial rapist from Kansas who had been seen lurking near the camp around the time the 3 girls were killed. Yet Stevens was quickly dropped from the list of suspects. Fingerprints, hair, saliva, and semen samples taken from the crime scene did not match his. The evidence cleared him, at least scientifically. Meanwhile, the trial of Gene Hart was drawing to a close. The sheriff boldly declared he was 1,000% convinced of Hart's guilt, but the jury took only 10 minutes to deliberate. The verdict, not guilty. Hart was acquitted of the murders of Lori, Michelle, and Denise. In the defendant's box, Gene Hart broke down in tears, seemingly overwhelmed with relief. The man who had remained cold and distant throughout the entire trial now struggled to contain his emotions. The moment was so striking, it was captured by cameras and broadcast across the country. But freedom wasn't waiting for him outside the courtroom. Hart was sent back to prison, since he had been on the run for 4 years before being arrested in connection with the Camp Scott case. His return to prison was short-lived. In June 1979, Jean Leroy Hart died of a heart attack following an intense weightlifting session in the prison gym. He had just turned 35. Hart's sudden death, the only real suspect in the Camp Scott murders, slowly pushed the case into the shadows of unsolved crimes. Years passed. No new suspects emerged. No new evidence came to light. Desperate not to see the case go cold, the victims' families formed support groups, organized fundraisers, and contributed to funding advanced DNA testing, hoping that science might speak where humans had failed. Between the early 1990s and 2000s, new DNA tests were conducted, but the results were inconclusive or offered no breakthroughs at all. It wasn't until 2022 that long-awaited results from a previously halted lab investigation were made public. The conclusion was clear. Jean Hart's DNA was found repeatedly on the clothing of the young girls. That was the declaration made by Mays County Sheriff Mike Reed, who added, "Unless new evidence comes to light, I remain convinced of Jean Hart's guilt." And so the case remains technically unsolved, resting now among America's many cold cases, haunting unfinished chapters of justice. The families never stopped fighting. Lori Farmer's and Michelle Goose's fathers continued to push for answers. Richard Goose helped pass new legislation supporting victims of sexual assault. Sherry Farmer, Lori's mother, founded the Parents of Murdered Children organization. The brutality of the crime, the tender age of the victims, the lack of motive, and the eerie setting of a scout camp in the supposedly wholesome, optimistic America of the 1970s turned the Camp Scott tragedy into one of the most shocking and disturbing cases of the last 40 years. And yet one chilling question continues to echo. Will the true killer ever be found? The sisters, neighbors, and childhood friends of the victims still carry the scars. One of Lori's friends once recalled, "It was personal. It hit close. Lori's death changed how we played, how we saw things in adults. The woods and the streets became scary places. We used to hop on our bikes and ride wherever we wanted. That time was over." In 1993, NBC released a documentary titled "Someone Cried for the Children," featuring testimonies from the victims' parents, former Camp Scott counselors, and childhood friends. In May 2022, for the 45th anniversary of the tragedy, Hulu released Keeper of the Ashes, The Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders, exploring the case in depth. As for Camp Scott, it never reopened. The land was handed over to another organization, but the camp itself remains closed, a silent witness to a horror no one will ever forget.